Welcome to Medieval India. Episode 31. Fall of the Mughal Empire. Within a few years after Aurangzeb's death, in 1707, Bengal became completely independent of imperial control under Murshid Quli Khan. At the time of Aurangzeb's death, Murshid Quli Khan was Naib Nazim, or Deputy Governor of Bengal, and full Governor of Orissa, as well as Diwan, or Revenue Chief, of those two provinces. On his accession to the throne in February 1713, Farrukh Zia confirmed him in the Diwani of Bengal, and in September 1713 he made him Deputy Governor of Bengal, and on 6 May 1714 he received the Subadari of Orissa with the title of Jafar Khan. In September 1717 he was made full Subadar of Bengal too, with the title of Mutaman ul Mulk Allahudallah Jafar Khan Bahadur Nasir Jan. He transferred the capital of Bengal from Dhaka to Murshidabad, which was named after him. By moving the imperial court, Murshid Quli secured in 1711 an order by which the collectorship of customs of the Hooghly port and the Faujdari of the Midnapur district, then held by Zia-ud-Din Khan, was again placed under the control of the provincial Diwan, from whom these had been removed and placed directly under the central government 2 years before. Murshid Quli could not dislodge Zia-ud-Din from Hooghly. But when Zia-ud-Din received information that the emperor had appointed him Diwan of the Western Karnataka, he left Hooghly at the end of June, and the man appointed by Murshid Quli got possession of it. As a strict ruler, Murshid Quli enforced his authority in various ways and established an efficient administration. He effectively reorganized the revenue system. As the result of a deal concluded by Murshid Quli with the imperial administration, Bengal no longer supported troops or Mughal dignitaries by allocations of revenue from land as Jakir. The Nawab took the Jakir land in Bengal under his own direct management on the assumption that he would be able to extract and remit to Delhi larger sums than was possible with the Jakir assignments. The Jakirs granted originally from Bengal were transferred to Orissa instead, a much less promising field, where their holders would have to struggle to raise any adequate revenue. About 1/4 of Bengal's revenue remained technically assigned to Jakirs, but the allocations were for the costs of Bengal's government and defense and for the personal expenses of the Nawab. In Bihar and Orissa, a considerable proportion of the total revenue was still committed to Jakirs. In Bihar, most of the revenue was so assigned until the middle of the century. Only a few of the Bihar Jakirs were at the disposal of the emperor, while those in Orissa were to be totally lost to him within a few years. The new crown lands were farmed by contractors. In the second or third generation, these contractors then came to be called zamindars or landlords, and many of them were further dignified with the title of Raja and Maharaja, though they were not of princely birth but merely glorified civil servants who were paid by a percentage on their collection. Thus, a new landed aristocracy was created in Bengal, whose position was then confirmed and made hereditary by British Governor-General Lord Cornwallis in his permanent settlement at the end of the 18th century. Those defaulting in collecting revenues were treated with draconic severity by Murshid Quli Khan. The increase of revenue was also due to Murshid Quli's economy in administration and the internal peace. While some of the older zamindars enjoyed Murshid Quli's favor and three ruling houses of Cooch Behar, Tipura and the hill Raj of Jainta paid tribute, powerful Sitaram of Bhushna Pargana was crushed by him on February 1714. Thus disappeared the last Hindu kingdom of Bengal. By all such means, Murshid Quli managed to ratchet up the revenues of Bengal from 12 million rupees at the beginning of the 17th century to 15 million around 1720 to 18 million around 1750. To improve the economic prosperity of the province, Murshid Quli showed much indulgence to the traders of all categories, but he was somewhat partial to the Mughals, that is Persians, who had escaped the chaos in the Safavid Empire. The Dutch and the French East India Company were not in a good condition, and the Ostend Company, started in the Austrian Netherlands by a charter from the Emperor in 1723, had its privileges suspended under diplomatic pressure for 7 years in 1727. The English East India Company secured some important concessions by sending an embassy to the Delhi court under John Sherman and by Emperor Farrukh Shiah's Farman of 1717, which permitted them to trade in Bengal free of all duties, subject to the payment of rupees 3,000 per year and to rent the 38 villages of Calcutta. Though Murshid Quli Khan opposed the grant of additional villages to the English, the prosperity of Calcutta rapidly increased. By the middle of the 18th century, very large numbers of people, sometimes estimated at well over 100,000 in each, were living at Murshidabad and in Calcutta. Within both towns, merchant communities tended to live apart round their own mosques, temples or churches. Artisans also had their own distinct quarters. By the 1750s, Calcutta had weavers, carpenters, bricklayers, smiths, tailors, braziers, and so on employed within its bounds. Contemporary Muslim writers bestowed the highest praise on Murshid Quli. Writing in 1763, Salimullah, the author of the Tarikh-i-Bengala, observes, quote, "Since the time of Shaista Khan, there had not appeared in any part of Hindustan an emir who could be compared with Jafar Khan for zeal in the propagation of the faith, for wisdom in the establishment of laws and regulations, for munificence and liberty in the encouragement and support given to men of noble family and eminence, for rigid and impartial justice in redressing wrongs and punishing offenders. His judicial decisions were rational and proper." And he pursues, quote, "He despised all kind of luxury, and particularly in dress and food. He possessed very extensive learning and paid great respect to men who were eminent for their piety or erudition. During his government, the meanest peasant was secured from injustice and oppression. 2 days in the week he administered justice in person and was so impartial in his decisions and rigid in the execution thereof that no one dared to commit oppression." End quote. 25 years later, Salimullah, the author of the Riyaz-us-Saladin, added, quote, "Never in his life did he take any consort except his one married wife. Such was his delicacy of feeling that he did not admit into his harem any eunuch or any woman who was not of known character and trustworthiness." End quote. After the death of Murshid Quli Khan on 30 June 1727, without any male issue, his son-in-law, Shuja-ud-Din Muhammad Khan, who had been deputy governor of Orissa, ascended to the Masnad of Bengal. He had married Murshid Quli Khan's daughter, named Zinat-un-Nisa, and had a son through her, named Sarfaraz. Soon after his accession, Shuja-ud-Din appointed his friends and kinsmen to the principal officers of his government. His son, Shah Faraz, became the nominal Diwan of Bengal. His second son, Muhammad Taqi Khan, born of a wife different from the daughter of Murshid Quli Khan, became governor of Orissa, and his son-in-law, Murshid Quli II, was appointed deputy governor of Jahangirabad or Dhaka. In managing all important affairs of administration, Shuja-ud-Din followed the counsel of Aliverdi, of his brother, of Alam Chand, a loyal officer, and of the able financier Jagat Seth Chand, the famous banker of Murshidabad, who, being of vast wealth, had much influence in Bengal politics. For the nawabs were said to have regarded shroffs, moneylenders, and merchants as their immediate support, as well as a necessary convenience in all their transactions. The cultivation of the lands has hitherto been carried on by their intervention." End quote. During the early part of his regime, Shuja-ud-Din paid close attention to the affairs of administration and sought to promote the welfare of his subject. He was charitable to his old friends, kind and bountiful towards his officers, and was hospitable towards those who happened to come to Murshidabad. With due regard for justice, he dispensed it impartially. Ghulam Hussain observes of him, quote, "He was so impartial an observer of justice and a judge of so much benignity that the poorest suitor was sure of being in his presence upon a footing with his very son, and the fearful sparrow, certain of finding in his bosom a shelter against the hawk's pursuit, flew towards him with a perfect reliance on his goodness." People acquainted with history thought they lived in Nushirvan's reign, that is the famous just king of Persian mythology. End quote. But some vices in Shuja-ud-Din's private character impaired the efficiency of his administration towards the close of his reign. Supreme power then fell into the hands of his advisors, Haji Ahmad, Alam Chand, and Jagat Seth Fateh Chand, a clique of self-seekers who fomented intrigues and conspiracies to serve their own interests at the cost of the government. Shuja-ud-Din had to remit a sum of 1,250,000 rupees a year to the imperial government at Delhi. The standard collections received from the zamindars amounted as before to 1,420,045,561, and Shuja-ud-Din added to it a further amount of rupees 190,000 by imposition or awabs of additional imposts, following an old practice of Murshid Quli Khan. Shuja-ud-Din strictly asserted his authority over the European trading companies in Bengal, like the English, the Dutch and the French. The English described him as a rash and powerful subadar and did not consider it advisable to risk an open rupture with him, as they said. They had to satisfy him occasionally by payments of large sums of money. After the death of Shuja-ud-Din, on 30 March 1739, his body was interred in his favorite garden on the west bank of the Bhagirathi River. His son, Shah Faraz, ascended the Masnad of Bengal, and following the deathbed instructions of his father, he retained the old officers, the most important of whom were Haji Ahmad as the chief Diwan and Alam Chand as Diwan of the Khalsa. Given to debauchery, Shah Faraz did not possess the essential qualities needed for the ruler of a state. For all this, he had to pay a heavy price by losing his life and losing the Masnad of Bengal. It was seized by Ali Verdi instead. From a humble position in the government of Shuja'uddin, Alaverdi Khan, originally known as Mirza Muhammad Ali, rose gradually to higher ones by dint of his tact and ability. In 1728, Shuja'uddin appointed him Fauzdar of Shakla Akbarnagar, Rajmahal. This was a fortunate turn in the career of Ali Verdi, with his appointment as deputy governor of Bihar in 1733 to follow. Bihar was then in the disturbed state due to the weak administration for about 7 years of its old governor, Fakhr-ud-Dawla. Ali Verdi restored peace and order in Bihar by vigorous steps and measures of reconciliation. He suppressed the disturbances with firmness. Bihar zamindars, who had not been quite amenable to the authority of the Nawab's government, were reduced to submission. He then suppressed the Shakwars, a brave and semi-independent Hindu tribe, who with their stronghold at Sambu, in the Bakosarai district, had defied the authority of the emperors of Delhi and the Subedars of Bengal. Ali Verdi also chastised the turbulent Banjara oxen drivers who, disguising themselves as traders and travelers, had been devastating different parts of Bihar. Weakness of Delhi authority, inefficiency of Sarfaraz, and machinations of Haji Ahmad at Murshidabad in collaboration with Jagat Seth Fateh Chand excited Ali Verdi Khan's ambitions to seize the Masnad of Bengal for himself. With this object, he left Patna for Murshidabad towards the end of March 1740. Sarfaraz was soon convinced of Ali Verdi's infidelity and left Murshidabad to stop his advance. In a furious contest between the armies of the two parties at Geria, on 10 April 1740, there were heavy casualties in Sarfaraz's army and he died from a chance shot to his forehead. Marching from Geria to Murshidabad, Ali Verdi formally ascended the Masnad. He secured imperial confirmation of his new position by remitting huge amounts of money to Delhi. He tried his best to assuage the wounded feelings of the relatives of Sarfaraz too. Haja Abdul Karim writes that by behaving kindly and being on friendly terms with all, by distributing money and by acting with discretion, Ali Verdi gained over to his cause all men living far and near. The repeated incursions of the Marathas into Bengal and Bihar from 1742 to 1751 harassed Ali Verdi Khan very much. Ali Verdi concluded the treaty with the Marathas in June 1751 that from October 1751 onward 120,000 rupees were to be paid annually to the Marathas from the Bengal revenue as the child of that Suba in 2 installments on condition that the Marathas would never set foot again within the dominions of Bengal. The Maratha invasions were complicated by the rebellions of its Afghan generals Mustafa Khan, Shamsir Khan, Sadr Khan, and the Afghan soldiers in 1745 and 1748 and added to his troubles. During the Afghan insurrection of 1748, Ali Verdi Khan's nephew Zainuddin and his brother Haji Ahmad were assassinated and Patna was under Afghan usurpation for full 3 months, which caused untold misery to its people. The Afghans were ultimately vanquished by Ali Verdi in a battle with them at Rani Sarai in 1748. Ali Verdi returned to Murshidabad in November 1748 after staying at Patna for 6 months to arrange for its administration. He made his grandson, Siraj-ud-Dawla, nominal deputy governor of Bihar. Worn out with incessant toil and weighed down with age at the age of 75, Aliverdi governed his province ably and with prudence and foresight. Ghulam Hussain writes in high terms about him, quote, "A prudent, keen general and a valorous soldier, there are hardly any qualifications which he did not possess." And another contemporary, Karam Ali, equally praised him as a tactful and strong governor who tried to infuse spirit and vigor into every branch of his administration and to serve the interest of the governed. Aliverdi, he further writes, never realized money forcibly from the people, and the mode of collection was not arbitrary. But to meet extraordinary financial needs during his first 11 years of his government, when the revenue collection fell short of the standard assessment, he took casual aid from the European traders and the principal zamindars of the province. Aliverdi Khan's attitude towards the European trading companies in Bengal was strict, and he asserted his authority over them. But he was not in any way oppressive to them, as he realized the importance of encouraging commerce in the interest of the state." End quote. Aliverdi was succeeded as Subedar of Bengal by his favorite grandson and heir designate Siraj-ud-Dawla, whose regime forms a turning point in the history not just of Bengal but of India as a whole. He had enemies among his near relations who coveted the Bengal Masnad, all the influence coming through it. They were his cousin, Shaukat Jan, who had been Nawab of Purnia, and his mother, eldest sister, Ghaziti Begum, who had amassed immense wealth which she had kept with herself, well-guarded by armed retainers, in the castle of Motijil, a few miles north of the city of Murshidabad. Siraj-ud-Dawla's most formidable enemy was Mir Jafar Ali Khan, the commander-in-chief of the army. Siraj-ud-Dawla thus came to his long-assigned throne in a house divided against itself, with a hostile faction in the army and a disaffected subject population. Soon after his accession, Siraj-ud-Dawla seized the huge wealth of Ghaziti Begum to curb her ambition for acquiring influence in government. He removed the traitor Mir Jafar from the post of Bakshi, or commander of the army, and appointed in his place the brave and devoted Mir Madan. Another faithful and able officer, Mohan Lal, was made chief of the Diwan in Khalsa. All this was followed by Siraj-ud-Dawla's ruptures with the English. Siraj-ud-Dawla had 3 grievances against them. The first was, as he wrote, that they had built strong fortifications and dug a large ditch in the king's dominion, contrary to the laws of the country. The second one, he further wrote, was that they had abused the privilege of their dastaks, or free permits, by granting them to such as were in no ways entitled to them, from which practice the king has suffered greatly in the revenue of his customs. His third complaint against the British was that they had given him protection in Calcutta to some of the king's subjects, and instead of giving them up on demand, they had allowed such persons to shelter themselves within their bounds from justice. He expressed his wish that he could pardon their faults if they promised to remove the foregoing complaints of their conduct and agreed, he further wrote, to trade upon the same terms as other merchants did in the time of Murshid Quli Khan. Certainly, those charges were not baseless. The English in Calcutta furthermore insulted Siraj-ud-Dawla's messenger, Narayan Singh. The conflict between the English and the Nawab soon started. On 4 June 1756, the factory of the English at Qasim Bazar was stormed by the Nawab soldiers, and starting for Calcutta on the 5th of June, the Nawab captured Calcutta on 20 June. Already on the 19th, Governor Drake with some of his followers had fled from Calcutta to Falta, and some Englishmen were made prisoner. Siraj-ud-Dawla also had made himself secure from the designs of Shaukat Jang, who, being instigated by Mir Jafar, sought to contest the subedarship of Bengal. By marching from Calcutta towards Purnia on 24 September 1756, Siraj-ud-Dawla defeated and killed him at the battle at Manihari on 16 October. After this, Siraj-ud-Dawla returned to Calcutta on gold-decorated boats with every pomp. On hearing of the disaster of the English in Calcutta, the Madras Council sent reinforcements there under Admiral George Watson and Colonel Robert Clive, who recovered Calcutta by the first week of February 1757. Adverse circumstances now forced Siraj-ud-Dawla to conclude the Treaty of Alinakar on 9 February 1757, by which the trade rights and factories of the English East India Company were restored to them, and restitution and compensation money were promised by the Nawab to the company, its servants and tenants. The English were granted permission by him to fortify Calcutta and to coin Sikka rupees there. Robert Clive rightly described the terms of this treaty as both honourable and advantageous for the company. The succeeding coup, in which after a skirmish at Placé Grove, Siraj-ud-Dawla was displaced by Mir Jafar, helped by Colonel Clive and his English, is commonly held to mark the end of the medieval period of Indian history. The Suba of Awadh had also become virtually independent of the Deccan Mughal Empire. The jurisdiction of the Suba of Awadh then extended not only over Awadh, but also over Benares, a good part of the territory to its west, and some districts near Allahabad and Kanpur. Sa'adat Khan, a migrant from Khorasan and originally known as Mir Muhammad Amin, was the founder of this kingdom of Awadh. After being in Sarbulin Khan's service, he joined Farrukh Siar's service, became Faujdar of Hindaun and Bayana, and was made a noble on 9 October 1720. He was then appointed governor, first of Agra and then of Awadh, in 1722, and he extended Awadh's jurisdiction over Benares, Ghazipur, Jaunpur and Shunar. He gradually acquired power and fame and was summoned to Delhi at the time of Nadir's invasion, as we saw in episode 23. But for his illegal transaction with Nadir, he either committed suicide on 20 March 1739 or died of his wounds. Sa'adat Khan, a prominent Mughal noble, was a successful soldier and a wise ruler. The next governor of Awadh was Sa'adat Khan's nephew and son-in-law, Safdar Jang. After the first Maratha invasion of Bengal in 1742, Muhammad Shah asked Safdar Jang to protect Bihar and, if necessary, to enter into Bengal. So he started from Faizabad for Bihar in December 1742, entered Patna city on 7 December, and encamped at Bankipur, 5 miles west of it. From this place he began to behave as the virtual ruler of Bihar. At this, Aliverdi requested the Mughal emperor to recall him from Bihar. So Safdar Jang left Bihar on 15 January 1743 and returned to his dominion of Awadh early in February. Safdar Jang was appointed vizier of the Mughal Empire in 1748. His position was one of unusual difficulty. He was considered a parvenu by the old nobility whose pedigree went back to the reign of Aurangzeb or even earlier. He had to meet the opposition of Nizam-ul-Mulk's son and grandson, Javid Khan, the real power behind the throne, and of the sons of the late vizier Qamar ud-Din. He fought the Afghans in 1748 and was defeated at Ramchautani in September 1750 and made peace with the Rohillas and Banglashes under orders of the emperor at the beginning of 1752. Safdar Jung got his opponent, Javid Khan, murdered in 1753. He had no administrative capacity or statesmanly vision. He tried to grasp everything and became increasingly domineering after the murder of Javid Khan. All this engendered court conspiracies against Safdar Jung and caused a civil war between the emperor and Safdar Jung from March 1753, and ultimately he left for Awadh in November 1753. Thus ended Safdar Jung's short and inglorious period of his viziership. But meanwhile he gave a lasting peace to Awadh and Allahabad, broken only by temporary Bangladesh occupations of a part of the Suba and a few local spasmodic outbreaks of violence in the beginning of his rule. Safdar Jung died in October 1754, and his son Shuja-ud-Dawla became Subedar of Awadh. Shuja-ud-Dawla's personal character was not at all commendable. The French director, Jean Lot, wrote about him thus from personal observation in 1758. Quote, Shuja is the most handsome person I have ever seen in India. He towers above the vizier Imad-ul-Mulk by his figure, the latter being small, and I believe also by the qualities of his heart, but he has to yield to him in all that relates to the spirit. He is occupied in nothing but pleasures, hunting, and the most violent exercises. End quote. Later, an English observer who was not biased against Shuja-ud-Dawla wrote, quote, Shuja-ud-Dawla was not endowed with the genius of a soldier. He wanted that valor or courage which is shown in the event of common danger. He evinced throughout the Rohilla War the pusillanimity, sheltering himself in the rear and betraying evident signs of fear. He had acquired an expensive knowledge in the practice of every species of deceit and could perform with facility every character that was necessary to conduct the various purposes of delusion or treachery. Generosity did not form a fixed part of his disposition. He was equally rapacious in acquiring as sordid in preserving wealth. His excesses in venery, which knew no control, led him to commit actions derogatory from his station as well as pernicious to his health. End quote. But Shuja-ud-Dawla has an important role in history in that period of rapid and significant political change, the Inqilab, or disturbances as Mir called the time. His relations with the imperial vizier Imad-ul-Mulk were bitter and led to plots and counterplots. After some fighting there was peace between the two in June 1757. Malignant hostility of the unscrupulous, jealous and all-powerful vizier Imad-ul-Mulk led the imperial prince Ali Gauhar, who was to become Shah Alam II, into friendship with Shuja-ud-Dawla. In 1758, Shuja-ud-Dawla encouraged Prince Ali Gauhar to invade Bihar. But Ali Gauhar's Bihar expedition in 1759 ended in failure as he had to move out of the province because of the man of Clive. During the Maratha-Afghan contest over North India, each of the rival parties sought to draw him over to its side, as we saw already. He finally fought as an ally of the Abdali, and Shuja-ud-Dawla was formally invested by Shah Alam II with the office of Vizier on 15 February 1762. In March he conducted an expedition against Hindu Pati, lord of the major part of Bundelkhand, taking Shah Alam II with him. After some negotiations, it was settled that Hindu Pati would pay a fine of 27,000 rupees and an annual tribute of 20,000. Deposed and driven away by the English, in July 1763, Nawab Mir Qasim sought for shelter in the court of Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla of Awadh. The Emperor Shah Alam was then also with the Nawab Vizier and agreed to help Mir Qasim in his effort to get back Bihar and Bengal when Mir Qasim visited him in February 1764. On the insistence of the Emperor, Shuja-ud-Dawla agreed to help Mir Qasim in recovering his lost province, more out of motives of self-interest than to help a distressed brother ruler. The exiled Mir Qasim helped Shuja-ud-Dawla in subduing the rebels of Bundelkhand and promised to pay the Emperor and Shuja-ud-Dawla 10 and 1,700,000 rupees respectively. Joined by a party of French adventurers, the three marched to Bihar. In the first half of 1764, there were some indecisive engagements between the English army and the army of the Allies. The English army was then badly disciplined due to the lack of military talent of its commander Major Karnak. On the arrival of Major Hector Monroe as commander of the army, the soldiers were duly brought under control, the mutineers among them being punished by being blown off the guns. The two armies met at Buxar on 22 October 1764. It resulted in Shuja-ud-Dawla's crushing defeat. After running from one place to another, he was finally defeated at the Battle of Kora on 3 May 1765. Monroe had then already handed the command of the army to Colonel Fletcher, and the latter overran Shuja-ud-Dawla's territory and occupied Benares, Buxar and Allahabad. Awadh now fell completely under British control. Shah Alam II, who had been insulted by Shuja-ud-Dawla shortly before the battle and abandoned after it, threw himself under the protection of the English, who arranged for his residence in the Allahabad fort. Shuja's defeat at the Battle of Buxar was certainly one of the decisive battles in Indian history. It confirmed the British supremacy over Bengal and Bihar, and it placed Awadh and Shah Alam II completely under the British influence. The victory has proven so complete, wrote the council in Calcutta to the Court of Directors of the East India Company on 26 November 1764, that our troops meet with no further resistance. Referring to this battle, Broome rightly observed, "Thus ended the famous Battle of Buxar, on which depended the fate of India, and which was as gallantly disputed as it was important in its results." End quote. Clive returned to Bengal as governor of the English East India Company for the second time in May 1765. He met Shuja-ud-Dawla at Benares on 2 August and the Mughal Emperor at Allahabad on 9 August and concluded treaties with both of them within a few days. By the Treaty of Allahabad, dated 16 August 1765, all territories of Shuja-ud-Dawla were restored to him, with the exception of the districts of Kora and Allahabad, which were given to the Emperor, Junnar, which was retained by the English, and the Zamindari of Benares, which was to belong to the family of Balwant Singh, who fell under English protection, though he was formally subordinate to the Nawab of Awadh. Shuja-ud-Dawla agreed to pay 5 million rupees to the English as compensation for their expenses of the recent war. He entered into a defensive treaty with the English for mutual support in the defense of his territories too, and agreed to defray the cost for the maintenance of the troops for this purpose. This treaty made the Nawab of Awadh, for all practical purposes, a dependent and subordinate ally of the English. The Deccan also became independent of Mughal control under Nizam ul-Mulk. When in 1724 he went to the Deccan for the last time as its governor, he dropped the curtain on one act of his career and began a new one. All his aspirations for restoring the power and the prestige of the Mughal Empire and guiding the government from its center and its minister had now been abandoned by him, as we saw in episode 27. For he felt that the mean and jealous favorites of the fickle emperor would not give him any leeway. He thus set out for the Deccan, determined to build up a political structure that would justify his title, the regulator of the realm. A new scene opened in the history of the Mughal Deccan too, with the Battle of Satrapies. The constant succession of short-term viceroys, the discord due to the 6 divisions being held by 6 different officers, and the civil strife between rivals for the viceroyalty henceforth ceased. There was now one ruler over the whole tract, who made it his home and planted his dynastic flag there, and did not receive orders from a far-off master any longer. His strong arm brought peace to that unhappy land, vexed by war for 40 years since the invasion of Aurangzeb. Ambitious local officers, rebel chieftains, and robber leaders now thought twice before challenging the vanquisher of Dilawar Ali, Ali Khan, Alim Ali, and Mubarak Khan. The enforcement of law and order, coupled with his moderate revenue assessment and strict prohibition of illegal cesses, gave security to the peasant and the trader, and the wealth of the country increased rapidly. Still, it was a splendid heritage into which Asaf Jah had entered. The 6 Deccan provinces had a standard revenue of 160 million rupees against 170 million from the other 12 provinces of the Indian Empire taken together, and though the actual collection there had now fallen to 130 million, or even less, it was still larger than what came to the impoverished exchequer of Delhi from elsewhere, and it was capable of rapid improvement under an orderly and beneficent administration. The lands of the old Qutb Shahi kingdom were fertile, and its wealth had excited cupidity of Prince Aurangzeb back in 1654, when he described the kingdom of Golconda to his father as a, quote, spacious kingdom, well cultivated, rich in mines of diamond, crystal, and so on, a money-yielding country unmatched by the imperial dominions, end quote. Its annex, the eastern Karnataka, was proverbially rich, a kingdom by itself. Bijapur, though less favored than Golconda, was enriched by the tribute of a belt of rich vassal states on its southern and western margins, the old Vijayanagar territories. That made it the richest among the 6 provinces, Hyderabad being a close second. The about 10 million inhabitants of Hyderabad and Berar were industrious, and they required only peace to yield gold. And that peace Nizam's long and uninterrupted rule for a quarter of a century assured. After the victory of Satrapies, the terror of Asaf Jah's arms, and the high reputation for capacity and spirit which he had brought with him, cowed his own refractory subjects. But the Marathas were an ever-present menace to him, and they were his main preoccupation throughout his rule, as they succeeded in nibbling away ever more of his state. And yet he was sincerely desirous of living at peace with them. He had seen with his own eyes how the whole force of the empire, wielded by Aurangzeb's genius for 25 years, had still failed to crush the Marathas. Raja Shahu too was eager to remain on good terms with the Mughal government and to avoid war at all costs. The Nizam claimed the full territorial legacy of Aurangzeb in the Deccan, modified only by the grant of 1718. This barred the expansion of the Marathas. Then began the inevitable clash between a legitimate but status quo authority, an authority who of course was a mere reincarnation of the Deccan sultanates, and the dynamic spirit of expansion of a new people trying to find its place under the sun. The same kind of clash as would happen between the rising power of Germany and the status quo powers of Britain and France in Europe in the 20th century. The Nizam's possession of Baklan blocked the easiest path for Maratha penetration into Gujarat, and Khandesh lay across their way to Malwa. Purely Maratha districts like Junar and Ahmednagar were under the Mughal sway. In the closing years of Asaf Jah's life, the triumphant Marathas swept onward to raid the eastern Karnataka and penetrated into the Kannada country southwards too, while they squeezed the Nizam's tribute payers there, and in the northeast the Bonsles of Nagpur conquered the Gond Rajas and encroached on the Deccan province of Berar. Shahu's authority as king was so little backed by force and was recognized by so few Maratha leaders that it was beyond his power to control the actions of the freelancers and adventurers among his nominal subjects and effectively keep them out of the Mughal Deccan. Thus the regular payment of the stipulated contribution, chald, did not safeguard the Nizam's dominion from Maratha depredation. One of Asaf Jah's earliest acts, after taking full possession of his charge in 1725, was to make an agreement with the Marathas. The chald of the Deccan provinces having been granted by the emperor by a royal rescript, Asaf Jah had merely to recognize it. But he did what was possible in the circumstances to save his realm from occupation and from extortions by a host of greedy Maratha tribute collectors. He settled with Raja Shahu that he himself would pay the amount of tribute in cash from his treasury, so that no Maratha collector need enter his dominions. Unauthorized extra taxes were abolished. This arrangement was concluded on Shahu's behalf by his minister Srivanas Rao, though Peshwa Baji Rao advocated a more aggressive and ambitious policy. Its details had not been fully worked out and had not been put into actual operation before war broke out. Unable to keep the Marathas within their own limits, Asaf Jah took refuge in diplomatic machinations. Malcontents among Shahu's subjects and those ministers of his government who were jealous of the Peshwa's ascendancy all found welcome at the Nizam's court. By their advice, he planned to create divisions in the Maratha state by installing Shambhaji of Kolhapur, the first cousin of Shahu to recall, as the head of the Maratha royal family. Shambhaji had gone to Asaf Jah in October 1726 to enforce his claims to Shivaji's throne. Two great Maratha nobles, Ramba Nimbalkar and Chandra Sen Yadav, the ex-commander-in-chief of Shahu, were on the Nizam side. Shahu's officer, Shimnaji Damodar, joined Shambhaji in 1727 and became his prime minister. With their support, Asaf Jah assembled a large army for the invasion of Maharashtra in November 1727. But Shahu learned of Asaf Jah's scheme far in advance, warned all his fort garrisons to be watchful, and struck the first blow by launching Baji Rao upon the Nizam's dominions. The Peshwa, passing west of Parner, forded the Godavari at Punjab Bay, and skirting the larger cities of Bijapur and Aurangabad, burst into the Jalna and Sindh district at the end of October to sack the country right and left. But Nizam was also on the move, and his advanced guards, led by Awadh Khan, dispersed the Maratha bands and beat them back. Baji Rao, avoiding a pitched battle, then began a series of rapid marches which completely baffled and exhausted his enemy. In fact, in this cross-country race over a fast, broken country, the Nizam, with his mail-clad heavy cavalry and cumbrous artillery, was completely outmaneuvered by the Maratha light horse, and he toiled painfully behind the Maratha host without being able to prevent its ravaging the countryside or bring it to an action. In the meantime, the Nizam, worn out by his long and futile marches, had wisely changed his plan of war. Giving up the pursuit of the elusive Baji Rao, he now in full force entered the Pune district that was denuded of defenders. Nothing could stand against him. Raja Shahu and Chimnachi, the Peshwa's brother and agent at court, took refuge in Purandar Fort. Every military station and town in the Pune district submitted to the Nizam in terror and was placed in charge of some agents of Sambhaji. One fort alone, Udaipur, refused to surrender and had to be taken by bombardment. Finally, the Nizam entered Pune city, proclaimed Sambhaji's authority over the country, and celebrated the Raja's marriage with the princess of Ramnakar. All this time, Shahu had received little news of Baji Rao's position and successes, and was frantically writing to him to come back for the defense of his home. From Betawat, Baji Rao turned southwards, crossed the Achanta stream, and forced the Nizam to retreat from Pune by marching upon his capital, Aurangabad. The Nizam deposited his camp and bagage at Ahmadnagar and set out to overtake Baji Rao. But the Peshwa cut the Nizam's lines of supply off and harassed his troops. At last, the Nizam was maneuvered into a broken waterless ground near Palkate, 20 miles west of Daulatabad, and was completely surrounded in March. However, after enduring much hardship, he managed to get out of this position. But disgusted by worthless Maratha allies, he withdrew his support of Sambhaji. Negotiations were opened and the treaty was made at Shevkaun, 22 March, by the terms of which the Nizam abandoned Sambhaji's cause and transferred the 12 Mahals, western Pune and Nasik, to Baji Rao. Shahu's collectors were restored to all their former places and the Nizam returned to Hyderabad. It was a complete triumph for Shahu. But this treaty did not bring peace any more than the former settlement of the Hyderabad tribute had done. Though there were no more regular wars between the Nizam and Shahu's government, the events of 1727 left behind them a spirit of mutual suspicion which continued for the next 4 years, with occasional conflicts between local officers and small invading bands on both sides. The Nizam now formed a plot with Trimbak Rao Dabade, the Maratha commander-in-chief, jealous of the Brahmin Peshwa and other malcontents, to cross Baji Rao. But before the two allies could complete their musters and effect a junction, Baji Rao's alertness again triumphed. Hastening to Gujarat, he slew Dabade near the Boy, 12 April 1731, and broke up his party. In the preceding month, the Nizam had gone to Berhampur, suppressing a rebel, Mohan Singh, and held secret negotiations with Muhammad Khan Bangash, the new viceroy of Malwa, on the bank of the Narmada. And soon after a fruitless chase of Baji Rao through Khandesh and Baglan, he returned to Aurangabad. Unsuccessful in war, the Nizam at last entered into a secret compact with Baji Rao, by which the Maratha government promised to leave the Deccan unmolested and to levy nothing beyond the stipulated Chout and Sardeshmukhi from there. The Nizam agreed to remain neutral during the projected Maratha invasion of Hindustan, provided that they did not injure his province of Khandesh in the northward march through it. This pact was confirmed during Baji Rao's visit to the Nizam in the Christmas week of 1732. Thus Maratha ambition was diverted to the north, and the heart of the Mughal Deccan enjoyed comparative peace. During the next 4 years, the government of the Deccan followed an even course, only disturbed by minor Maratha raids here and there. The Nizam used to go out on tour every winter and return to Aurangabad or Berhampur for cantering during the rainy season. He collected tributes from his dependents, like the Rajas of Western Kannada and the Pathan nawabs of the Karnataka, and attended to the normal administration, following his usual practice of changing the local officers every 2 years. When in 1737 the Marathas carried their depredations to the gates of Delhi, the emperor repeatedly wrote to Asaf Jah to come to his aid. The Nizam reached Delhi on 13 July 1737. His defeat by Baji Rao at Bhopal and the humiliating treaty by which he had extricated himself, his passive participation in the Battle of Karnal with Nadir Shah, and his quarrels with the emperor's new favorites after the departure of Nadir have been dealt with in previous episodes. A second time, despairing of reforming his master's government, or even of preserving his own honor in that hopeless court, he finally left Delhi on 7 August 1740 and returned to Berhampur on 19 November. Here he found a perilous situation created by the ambition of his second son, Nasir Jung, whom he had left in the Deccan as his deputy during his 3.5 years' absence in northern India. This young noble was of a fiery nature, in contrast with his father's cool and far-sighted judgment and perfect self-control. Taking advantage of the shock given to the imperial power by Nadir's invasion and Asaf Jah's absence, the Marathas had achieved many successes. At last a meeting was arranged between the two chiefs and peace was made by granting the district of Karkan and Handia to the Peshwa. Shortly afterwards, Baji Rao died. Nasir Jung, now freed of all enemies at home, formed the plan of usurping the government of the Deccan from his aged and absent father. Evil councillors gathered round the hot-headed youth, who began to act with unrestrained caprice and tyranny. This news brought Asaf Jah to Berhampur, where he halted for 2 months, trying to reason with his son. Many of the rebels' adherents took this opportunity to come over to the Nizam's side. Nasir Jung, unable to face his father in the field, sought asylum at the tomb of Shah Burhanuddin. The Nizam crossed the Tapi on 16 January 1741, and after a friendly meeting with the new Peshwa, Balaji Rao reached Aurangabad in March. Nasir Jung, in fear of his father, fled to Mulher Fort, but while the Nizam's forces were dispersed in cantonments for the rain, the rebel returned to Aurangabad at the head of 7,000 horses on 2 August 1741. Asaf Jah boldly rode out of the city with his small escort but strong artillery and encamped at the Idgah, or tomb of a Sufi, outside. In the next day's battle, most of the rebel captains fled away, Nasir Jung was taken prisoner, and his chief councillor, Shah Nawaz Khan, went into hiding for 5 years. After suppressing his son's rebellion, Asaf Jah engaged himself for some time in exacting tribute from refractory dependents, and then his attention was drawn to the Karnataka. This rich province, with its capital at Awadh, was governed by an Arab family of the Nawabs clan, which had offended the Marathas and the Nizam alike. The first by neglecting to pay to the former the annual compensation agreed upon for the relinquishment of Shivaji's forts and territories in that region, and the latter by denying the homage and surplus revenue, 1,200,000 rupees a year, due to him as the supreme representative of the emperor in the south. Besides, in 1737, Chanda Sahib, the son-in-law of the ruling Nawab of Awadh, had seized Tiruchirappalli and many other places in the Maratha kingdom of Tanjore by treachery, with the Nawab's support. But the Maratha army, 10,000 strong, led by Fateh Singh and Rakhoji Bhonsle, had started from Satara on 17 January 1740, had invaded Awadh and had defeated and slain its Nawab, Dost Ali. They had taken from his successor, Safdar Ali, a promise of 10 million rupees as indemnity. On 6 April 1741, they captured Tiruchirappalli, made Chanda Sahib a prisoner, and left Murarji Rao Karpade as their governor there. On 13 October 1742, Safdar Ali was murdered by his cousin Murtuza Ali, and the whole province fell into anarchy. Asaf Jah set out from Hyderabad in January 1743 with a vast force, and after establishing his authority at Awadh, laid siege to Tiruchirappalli in March. Murarji, at the head of 2,000 horse and 4,000 foot, held out for 5 months, but evacuated the fortress on 25 August and left the province with all his Marathas. Asaf Jah then took from the Raj of Tanjore 1,000,000 rupees, left Tiruchirappalli in October, and at Awadh deposed the family of Safdar Ali and installed his own agent Anwar Uddin as the new Nawab. When in January 1744 he reached the bank of the Krishna on his return journey, he found his passage blocked by a large Maratha force, but their opposition was removed by treaty, which was more agreeable than war to the Nizam's general method of proceeding. Asaf Jah's health had meanwhile deteriorated, and he died just outside Berhampur on 1 June 1748 at the age of 79. Besides liberally patronizing Muslim theologians and holy men, scholars and poets from all parts of India and the rest of the Islamic world, he himself also wrote Persian poetry, which fills 2 volumes. Among his constructions are the new walls of Berhampur city, replacing the dilapidated walls built by Aurangzeb to keep Maratha raiders at bay, a new city named Nizamabad above the ruined pass of Fardapur, protective walls around Hyderabad city, and the Harsal Canal running through Aurangabad. He was, of course, the founder of a dynasty which would endure until 1947. For a quarter of a century, Asaf Jah had been the most outstanding personality in the Mughal Empire. He was universally regarded as the last representative of the times and of the spirit of Aurangzeb. With the death of Asaf Jah, a change came over the scene. The striking inferiority of his successors to him in ability and character was aggravated by the increasingly clear inferiority of Indian warfare to the European way of war that required far larger and far more punctual expenditures on troops and munitions than was necessary in an Indian Middle Ages that were now over. More than ever, the life of the state depended on the regular collection of the revenue. But Asaf Shah's sons had not half his skills in war and diplomacy, and did not even have the wisdom to confide in trusted ministers. After his death, ministers were constantly changed. The ruler spent his time partying, while the finances were mismanaged and the revenue shrank. Under Asaf Jah's successors, we have a brilliant and extravagant court where the arts flourished and hospitality and charity were practiced on an immense scale. That was supported by a rapacious hierarchy of corrupt officials who were always striving to extort a fortune from their functions before the court could pounce upon them due to their corruption. At the time of Asaf Shah's death, his eldest son, Mir Muhammad Pana Ghazi-ud-Din Khan, was living in Delhi as his father's deputy at court. The viceroyalty of the Deccan was seized by his second son, Nasir Jang, who had for some years past acted as his father's lieutenant and being present on the spot could easily get hold of his treasures and troops. At the invitation of the emperor, he started for Delhi with the object of overthrowing the new minister, Safdar Jang, but had to return from the bank of the Narmada as the emperor was cowed by his minister and ordered Nasir Jang to go back, formally creating him viceroy of the Deccan with the title of Nizam of Hyderabad. At this time, Asaf Jah's daughter, Muzaffar Jang, claiming the viceroyalty, went to the Karnataka in concert with Chanda Sahib, an aspirant to the nawabship of Arcot, who had recently secured his release from a Maratha prison. The two allies bought the help of the French chief François Duplessis and gained Arcot after killing its nawab. Nasir Jang, with a vast army of 10,000 horse and 100,000 foot, marched to the Karnataka, came upon his enemies near Valadavur, secured the abject surrender of Muzaffar Jang, and returned to Arcot. But on 16 December he was shot by Himad Khan, the Pathan chief of Karnal, during a treacherous attack on his camp by the French under Duplessis' orders, 20 miles north of Jinji. The French now raised Muzaffar Jang to the viceroyalty and marched towards Hyderabad, but on the way at Lakaradi Peli, 35 miles south of Kudapa city, the new viceroy fought his Pathan dependent and he was slain. The Marquis de Bussy, the commander of his French escort, was bribed by his revenue minister, Raja Raghunath, to support Asaf Jah's third son, Salabat Jang, who was proclaimed to a successor and ultimately gained from Delhi the title of Asaf-ud-Dawla. Says the chronicler Azad Bilgrami, quote, Muzaffar Jang was thus the first to engage Europeans and bring them into the realm of Islam. After his death, the French troops continued in the service of Salabat Jang and got extensive jagirs, so they became the chiefs all in all in the Deccan. Bussy, however, soon justified the high price paid for his support. The succession of Salabat Jang was opposed by the Peshwa, who wished the Deccan viceroyalty to be given to Asaf Jah's eldest son, Ghazi-ud-Din, a tame, scholarly man who could act tamely as a deputy for the Peshwa. Balaji intrigued at the imperial court in favor of Ghazi-ud-Din and at the same time obstructed Salabat Jang's agents taking possession of their territories. War resulted. But while the Peshwa was engaged in a civil war with his domestic enemies, the Maratha governors of Gujarat and Berar, Salabat Jang invaded Maharashtra with his French contingent and forced his way towards Pune. The rival forces came into contact on 1 December 1751. On the night of 3 December, the French surprised Balaji Rao between Arangaon and Sarkia on the bank of the Sina, put him to flight in his underwear, slew many of his troops, and plundered all their property, including the Peshwa's images of the gods and cult ritual vessels. But Balaji soon rallied his scattered forces and delivered a counterattack only 5 days later, in which many were slain on both sides. Salabat advanced, plundering up to 18 miles northeast of Pune. The campaign, however, ended indecisively owing to scarcity of provisions and dissensions in the Mughal camp. A truce was patched up, and Salabat started for his capital in the middle of April 1752. The danger which Salabat Jung dreaded the most now approached him. His elder brother, Ghazi-ud-Din, started on 17 May from Delhi with a strong Maratha escort in order to wrest the viceroyalty of the Deccan, which had been conferred upon him by the emperor with the title of Nizam-ul-Mulk. To meet this invasion, Bussy arranged for Salabat Jung a defensive subsidiary alliance with Balaji, signed on 5 August, ceding to the Peshwa the province of Khandesh. The Peshwa on his part promised to defend Salabat Jung against all, quote, who might come to dispute the Deccan with him, even if it were the vizier himself furnished with the emperor's authority. But the storm unexpectedly blew over. Ghazi-ud-Din was poisoned by his stepmother only 17 days after his arrival at Aurangabad. Salabat Jung thus gained security, but he had neither civil nor military capacity, nor character enough to act of his own will or trust able agents. Throughout his regime, he was a mere puppet in the hands of successive regents who ruled the state, while the intrigues of his courtiers and the mutinies of his unpaid soldiers paralyzed the administration. The best of these regents was Samsam-ud-Dawla Shah Nawaz Khan, who was in office from December 1753 to July 1757, and who succeeded in removing the financial insolvency of the government, who restored administrative efficiency, repressed foreign enemies and rebellious vassals, and gave some peace and happiness to the subject population. Shah Nawaz Khan was first in many branches of knowledge, particularly in history, in which his enduring monument is Ma'asir al-Umara, or biographical dictionary of the Mughal peer, in 3 large volumes. High-minded, sympathetic to all, habitually charitable, a lover of justice, dealing directly with suitors in an open court without allowing intermediaries, an expert in financial management and diplomacy alike, he wrought a magical change during his 4 years of chancellorship, by his wisdom and administrative genius, and converted the insolvency of the state, when household goods had to be sold for feeding the Nizam, into a balanced budget at the end of his 4th year in office, and he kept the Marathas within their limits. If he failed in the end to reform the government, it was due to the incurable love of intrigue of the entire official class and nobility, and due to the domination of the French praetorians. French intrigue succeeded in overthrowing the great minister. The pay of the army was due for 2 years, and instigated by others, the soldiers rioted in the city and forced the Nizam to dismiss Shah Nawaz and appoint the pro-French Salabat Jung as regent. A terrible popular rising broke out that day. The ruffians and the mob of Hyderabad wanted to sack Shah Nawaz's house, but 2 nights later he escaped to Daulatabad, abandoning his house to plunder. Profiting by this internal division in the Nizam's realm, the Peshwa's son, Vishwas Rao, invaded the country east of Aurangabad. So Salabat made terms with Shah Nawaz and induced him to return on 13 November 1757. But all power now passed into the hands of Nizam Ali, who was appointed heir and regent. The campaign of Nizam Ali against the Peshwa in the Sinkat region ended in a peace by which the Marathas claimed 2.5 million rupees worth of land in the Deccan and the fortress of Naldurg. At the time, Bussy and his force had been absent on the east coast, fighting the English. They now returned to Aurangabad, where Bussy's manager, Haidar Jang, completely deceived Shah Nawaz Khan and seduced Nizam Ali's army by paying 800,000 rupees, and at last, on 5 April 1758, caused Shah Nawaz to be arrested. Salabat Jang himself was placed under the French guards. Haidar was planning to imprison Nizam Ali and to seize the supreme power when he himself was treacherously murdered by the prince, who escaped the vengeance of the French brigade by marvelous skill and bravery. A riot raged through Hyderabad, in the course of which Shah Nawaz and his son were murdered in prison by Lakshmana, an officer of the French corps. The new regent, Basalat Khan, the fifth son of Asaf Jah, proved a mere cipher. But as the British asserted their armed superiority, Bussy was recalled by Lally to the Madras coast in June 1758. Nizam Ali then came back to Hyderabad, and after some quarrels among the three brothers, he succeeded in being invested with all power. Nizam's army, deprived of its French corps and Ibrahim Khan Kardi's artillery, the latter having entered the Peshwa's service now, as we saw in the previous episodes, was reduced to helplessness. The strength and ambition of the Marathas increased from the adhesion of Ibrahim Khan Kardi, which stiffened their myriads of light horses with French-trained modern artillery. The Peshwa, as we saw in the previous episodes, renewed the war with the Nizam. His cousin Sadashiv Rao claimed the important fortress of Ahmadnagar by terms on 9 November 1759, and the vast army under the Peshwa's brother Raghunath and his cousin Sadashiv, with Ibrahim Gardi's artillery, began the invasion of the Hyderabad country in the beginning of January 1760. Nizam Ali, with Salabat Jang, issued forth to oppose them and reached Udkir on the 9th. The Mughal force, only 7,000 men strong, was completely enveloped by 60,000 Maratha horsemen, and this time the Cossack tactics of the Marathas were combined with the European mode of warfare of Ibrahim Khan Kardi against the Nizam. The march from Udkir to Ausa was a long-drawn agony. The small Mughal army, slowly moving in the open field in closed columns, presented a sure target to the French-drilled artillery that was hovering around them, while the dispersed and wheeling Maratha horses were practically safe from their enemy's fire. When on 3 February the Nizam reached Ausa, 40 kilometers south of Darur, 40,000 Marathas attacked his rear guard, which was straggling some miles behind, and a great disaster fell on it, and all the commanders and most of the men were killed. The victorious Marathas then fell upon the Mughal center, and the battle raged till sunset. The Nizam's army was in no condition to continue the fight, so he made peace by ceding territory, yielding 6 million rupees in the province of Aurangabad, half of Bijapur and Bidar, the fortresses of Asir, Daulatabad and Mulhir, and the cities of Bijapur and Berhampur to the Peshwa. The descendants of Asad Jah retained nothing more than Hyderabad, some parts of the province of Bijapur, and a little of Bidar, and that too on condition of paying the Marathas 1/4 of the revenue. This was the apogee of Maratha power. Its nemesis came at Panipat within a year, followed by the death of Balaji Rao, the succession of his minor son, and internal dissensions caused by the guilty ambition of his brother Raghunath Rao, which paralyzed the Maratha power. Seizing this opportunity, Nizam Ali invaded Maharashtra in November 1761 and made his way to within 14 miles of Pune. The Peshwa made peace and relinquished nearly half of his father's territorial gains in the Mughal Deccan. Nizam Ali returned to Bidar, seized the government, and threw Salabat Jang into prison, where the latter died 2 years later. The shadowy emperor of Delhi sanctioned the usurpation by creating Nizam Ali viceroy with the title of Nizam Asaf Jah II. With the accession of Nizam Ali in 1762, a long period of stability begins in the affairs of the Mughal Deccan. We have at least one man ruling for 41 years and passing an undisputed succession on to his progeny. Family dissensions, except for a short and futile outbreak by his son, ended. Peshwa's family, on the other hand, was stricken by disease, physical and moral. The ensuing peace could have been utilized for reforming the Hyderabad state and improving its people's lot. If only there had been wise rulers and honest ministers, but there were not, alas. In the last episode of this series, we shall be looking at the new states which arose in the first half of the 18th century, and that will be the end of this course.